Welcome to Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Nave. If you're a regular listener, you know that I air this show every weekend on WPVM-FM in Asheville and KCEI-FM, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. Since both stations are community radio stations, I have a lot of creative liberty to explore different ways of communicating than I would if I were on a commercial radio station. This means I can choose my guests as I like. It also means that I can go solo when I please. I can have more than one person on as a guest. I can do whatever I want within creative reason. So today, as I was thinking about the stories I would like to tell, the things I'd like to reflect on, I began to think about movement, and I began to think about travel, and I began to think about the American highways and other highways I've traveled throughout my life. And whenever I think of traveling, whenever I think of moving around the highways, I think of cars. I've always been interested in cars. And so today I would like to reflect on some of the stories that I have been privileged to experience thanks to the car and all the traveling and roaming around I've done. It's been a big part of my life. It's been the tool that has allowed me to explore the land, not only the land in America, but to explore other lands as well, Ireland, France, even the Philippines, where I am right now. I drive a great deal in Manila, which is a bit like being a blackbird flying in a large murmuration of blackbirds. You've seen those before, swirling above the trees, and then they all funnel down into the trees, and nobody quite knows how they do it, but they somehow seem to communicate. So that's what the driving is like here in Manila. Mostly, however, my driving has been done on the American highways all over the country. Years ago, when we were driving around doing performance poetry for school kids, we would go from school to school, state to state. We used a Rand McNally road map, used sketches of paper, jotting the directions down, and somehow managed to find our way around using the payphone as the connector. No cell phones, no GPSs, none of that. We were left on our own. And I discovered that it became fairly easy after a while to come into a town and have a sense of where I was located in that town based on the way the town's geography was laid out. Turns out the towns are all laid out not quite the same, but there's a similarity to the layout of a town. And all you have to do is find one location, like a mountain or a building, and determine north, south, east, and west. And once you have those locations, you can geolocate. And you don't have to be digital to geolocate. You can do it physically, just like the navigators on the sea have done it for centuries, looking up at the stars. Navigators on a boat need water. Navigators on land need some sort of conveyance, and it's usually a car. I've owned a few pickup trucks over the years, but mostly I've had cars. Many people who own cars not only use the cars for conveyance, they also use the cars to project a status symbol. The more expensive car communicates that you have more means, and the less expensive old car, quote unquote, communicates that you may have limited means, although we all know that's not true. You probably know people who drive around in old beater cars and they have big fat bank accounts and they just don't care. Or if they don't care, they just simply don't notice it. It's irrelevant to them. I have a friend in Asheville who fits that category. He drives around in an old beater Subaru. It's a bit rusty, paint's peeling off of it, the tires are kind of funky, the seat sits low, he sits down in the seat and drives it around. The truth is, the fellow has plenty of money, lots of land, and has had a very successful life. And yet, he's just not interested in projecting any kind of image at all. He's perfectly happy to be driving around in his old car, going unnoticed, or if he's noticed, being dismissed, and that's fine with him. This same friend that I'm talking about driving around in his beater Subaru once owned a classic Morgan. The Morgan is a British car, and the suspension is made out of wood. And he let me drive that car a fair amount. It was an absolute beautiful, beautiful collectible classic. So the irony with my friend, even though he does drive a beater car, he knows probably more about racing cars and cars in general than most people you will ever meet. One of the reasons I think cars have a great value in the creative discussions that we have in this world and in discussions in general, because we all have some kind of relationship with vehicles. We travel, we move, we're creatures of mobility, we're creatures of migration, and we have to get from one place to another, and we use cars and other conveyance as a way of achieving that goal. The first car I ever owned wasn't a car at all. It was a go-kart. My grandfather made this go-kart out of metal that he welded together. He put a seat on the frame, put a steering wheel on the frame, put 4 large-ish kind of tires on the go-kart, and mounted a 5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton gasoline motor behind. Dropped my brother David and me into the thing, pointed us down Pine Lane, cranked the engine and started it up, and off my brother David and I went down Pine Lane driving for the first time. We were going maybe 5 miles an hour or 3 miles an hour, but we were driving and we were moving and we were going down a road, even if it was dirt, even if it was covered in pine leaves from the large 100-foot pine trees that loomed over us. There we were, boys wanting to be drivers, going somewhere, even though it was from my grandfather's house 200 feet or so down the road to my father's driveway. Even though the go-kart wasn't a car, I was still driving, and that was what mattered to me. I couldn't wait till I turned 16 and would be able to get my license and drive like my father drove. My father had a 1948 Chevrolet sedan 4-door, which he drove to work and back. He drove us to church. We drove it to the grocery store. And occasionally on Sunday afternoons after church, we would go to a small diner or a restaurant and have a family meal, all in the 1948 Chevrolet. To this day, I have on file digitalized movies of the 8mm movies my father shot, and many of those movies include that 1948 Chevrolet. My father was very proud of the fact that he was a Chevrolet man, not a Ford man. I never really understood the distinction, but for him, Chevrolet was the only car to buy. I mentioned the car as a status symbol, and for us, the car was a utilitarian symbol. Nothing status about the 48 Chevrolet. It was something that did a job. We got in it, we drove to where we needed to go, we did what we needed to do, and we came back home. There was no sense that the car had any more social value other than transportation. It wouldn't take long for me to change my attitude around the car as a status symbol, because in 1957, my Uncle Johnny, who lived just down the street as well on Pine Lane, came home with a brand new 57 Chevrolet. It was very shiny and had that new car smell, which he made sure that we got in his new car and sniffed around until we experienced it. I didn't realize it at the time, but there was some competition going on between my father and Uncle Johnny. So it wasn't long after my father showed up, not with a 57 Chevrolet, but with a 1955 Chevrolet 2-door coupe with a 283 V8 under the hood, which was a very impressive engine at the time. And even though the car was a 2-year-old car, not new like Uncle Johnny's car, it was an impressive, shiny car that my father was very proud of. So suddenly we went from a 1-car family to a 2-car family, the 48 Chevy and the 55 Chevy. To this day, if you own a 57 Chevy or a 55 Chevy, especially the coupes, you own a car that will sell anywhere between $40,000 and $100,000 at the vintage car auctions. When Uncle Johnny and my father brought their cars home, they certainly weren't thinking about auctioning them off, but they were thinking about status. They were aware of it, even though I wasn't. But I began to understand a bit of the status once we started riding around in our 55 Chevy. I don't know if people looked at us any differently than they did when we were in the older car. But I do remember feeling different riding around in the newer car, maybe a little more important, a little more together. I was young and didn't really know how to process all of that, but it was in play, and I was becoming more and more aware of the car as not only a conveyance, but also as a status symbol. And remember back in the 50s and the 60s, Chevrolet was one of the big car dealers, one of the big three, and always showing ads on TV. Dinah Shore would sing, "See the USA in your Chevrolet, America is asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA, America is the greatest land of all." The advertising message in that minute-long clip that we saw on black and white TV was, "Only proper Americans drive Chevrolets, and it's such a great land that you have to go see it, and you can do it in that Chevrolet." And the images on the screen switched from the sea to the desert to curvy roads to wide roads. It's a rather rousing tune, and you can look it up on YouTube, "See the USA in your Chevrolet" by Dinah Shore, and there you have it. You'll be able to get the same vibe we got when we were young and watching those TV ads run across that screen. You know, when you think about your youth, whenever you grew up, or if you're young and you're listening to it now and you are in your youth, all of these cues will collect over the years and become part of your story. As I viewed that YouTube ad, just researching to see if I actually remembered the truth of it all, which it turned out I did, I wonder if that ad and the jingle, "See the USA in your Chevrolet, America's the greatest land of all," I wonder if that jingle got into my psychology, and that was what took me out beyond Brevard Road to drive cars all over America and other parts of the world as well, covering millions and millions of miles over the years, looking for what? Maybe I'm looking for America, looking for the dream, or looking for myself. When you go out there and you travel, what are you looking for? What do you seek? What are you after? Maybe it's just the experience itself. You don't have to have an end result in order to make a journey worthwhile. You just go out there and see what happens. So when my father bought his 55 Chevy and my uncle got his 57 Chevy, we did drive around Western North Carolina. We didn't see the USA in our Chevrolet, but we did see Western North Carolina in my father's Chevrolet. I remember driving down Saluda Gray, watching the kudzu grow up and over the tops of miles of oak trees and pine trees. I remember my arm hanging out the window. I wanted my arm to be brown because I thought having a brown arm in the summertime was most desirable. And I most remember wanting to go somewhere, go do things, go find out things. But I also remember some of the more interesting, somewhat tragic times. Once when I was much younger, probably around 10 years old, I had somehow read about people hitchhiking. And I thought, well, if I can't drive, I can hitchhike. So one afternoon, I was walking home, probably on a weekend. I don't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday. Let's say it was Sunday. I was walking back from the little convenience store that was a quarter of a mile down Brevard Road, Star Grocery, I believe it was called. I don't know why I was there. The fellows hung out there, so we all would go to Star Grocery and buy something, a piece of candy, and stand around and talk. So I was walking home from Star Grocery, not very far from the turn to Pine Lane to go to my father's house, my mother's house, where the 48 Chevy and the 55 Chevy sat in the driveway. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I hitchhiked. So for reasons that I still don't remember, I decided to turn around, put my foot on the edge of the road, and stick my thumb out, hoping to catch a ride. I was hitchhiking. I was going somewhere. What I didn't calculate, when I put my foot on the road, I believe I stepped out a little further in the road than I should have. I was a boy. I couldn't calculate the dimensions, if you will. So when I put my foot out and put my thumb out, very excited, the car swerved away from me over into the other lane. And when the car swerved, the car coming on going in the traffic swerved too, swerved so much that it flipped over on its side and spun out in the ditch. And the other car kept going. So here the car was, crashed on the side of the road. Here I was, the boy hitchhiking who had caused the accident, and I panicked and I ran like crazy. Nobody really noticed me. Nobody knew why the car had flipped, but I knew that. I was in the wrong, even though I didn't intend to be, but I certainly was that day. So I went back down to the house and reported that there had been an accident on the road. And I remember my father and mother came out and stood on the little field beyond our house where they could see to the road, which was only 150, 200 feet. And sure enough, there was the car turned on its side, and somebody was upriding the car. I don't think anybody was hurt. But that was my first tragic problem in hitchhiking. I never had that many problems traveling, but that was one that I remember not fondly. I remember it with a bit of egg on my face, maybe even a little bit of shame. And yet that's the road. The cars represent so many things. And even though cars and road go together, the road has been around a lot longer than the cars have. People have been migrating and traveling forever. We are a migratory species. And because of that, we move around. And that may be one of the reasons why I was drawn to the idea of cars and conveyance, and why to this day, the car still plays a big role in my life. Even though I don't have a status car, I have a Toyota Corolla that could be about as negative a status car as one could have. And yet it's reliable, it does well for me, it's affordable, it's easy to repair, and like my buddy who had the old Subaru, my Corolla's not beat up at all, actually shines up rather well. I like the invisibility of it. Nobody notices the Corolla. If I were driving around in a Rolls Royce, somebody would probably notice it, but not the Corolla. So I love the invisibility of the Corolla. And yet I am drawn to the fancy cars. I do like those cars. And as I mentioned, my buddy with the Subaru, he had the Morgan that I drove. I remember when I was driving the Morgan around, I felt very important. Top was down, it was a two-seater, the engine roared, shifted the gears, drove it on the Blue Ridge Parkway, curving around. And people did look, and I projected from their looks what they might have been thinking about. I'll never know, but I can tell you when I was driving that Morgan, I felt very elegant, very cool, very posh. Sir John Benjamin, in his poem, The Subaltern's Love Song, offers a sense of how I felt when the subaltern and the woman he loves leave their home and take a trip through the country. She's driving. Here are the two stanzas. The hillman is waiting. The lights in the hall. The pictures of Egypt are bright on the wall. My sweet, I am standing beside the oak stair, and there on the landings, the light on your hair. By roads not adopted, by woodlanded ways, she drove to the club in the late summer haze, into 9 o'clock Camberley, heavy with bells and mushroomy, pine-woody, evergreen smells. That was a couple of stanzas from The Subaltern's Love Song by Sir John Benjamin. When I was driving the Morgan on the Parkway, there were no mushroomy, pine-woody, evergreen smells, but I did have the sense of the open air and the great views you get on the Blue Ridge Parkway. The Morgan was a loner for one afternoon. I went back to driving my regular car after that. I don't remember what it was. It certainly wasn't a fancy, posh car like the Morgan, but I do remember enjoying it. And I projected my own aspirations as I was driving down the parkway in the Morgan, shifting the gears, listening to the roar of the engine, and just having a grand old time on a summer afternoon. Like I said earlier, he let me drive it more than once, but not that often. But every time I returned the car and got back into my older car, less eventful car, I did feel a shift. I still think it's funny that my buddy drives that old beater Subaru to this day. I believe back then he had some old Honda he was driving around, and he kept his Morgan tucked away in a garage, which he did drive occasionally on the weekends, because I'm sure it made him feel as posh and elegant as it made me feel, or at least that's my projection. Elegance aside, for me, and maybe this is true for you as well, cars have always represented freedom of movement, an opportunity for me to go somewhere, to explore new things, to find corners that I couldn't otherwise visit. So while I do appreciate the fine, fancy automobiles, because cars represent freedom of movement, I'm not as fussed about what kind of car takes me somewhere, because I'm more interested in the movement. I'm more interested in the freedom of going somewhere. And the car represents a tool that will allow me to explore that sensibility. Not only is it a tool, it's a symbol. It represents movement. It represents the capacity for me to expand my awareness, my intelligence, my imaginative process, my sense or even need for adventure, to explore what's right around the corner, what's going to happen next. So the car as a symbol is something that I don't have to own. I just appreciate it for what it will do. And when I do get a chance to ride in a car that's really fancy, I appreciate that experience as well. But the primary driver for me is going somewhere and finding out something new, seeing the world. The car became the primary symbol because that's all I knew. Had I lived in New York City, the subway would have been the symbol to take me somewhere. Had I grown up in Europe, maybe in Paris, the train would have been that same symbol to take me somewhere. I would have always, as a boy, longed to go to Gare du Nord and take the train and go north to Belgium. In the vast American West, cars and trucks certainly have symbolic value. The horse still remains the mystical conveyance, the magical way to get around, the essence of freedom. All you have to do is drive north from Taos to southern Colorado and the open range, and when you spot the wild horses running, you'll start to see what I mean. For me, growing up in the South in the 50s and the 60s, when the muscle cars were popular, there was the Chevy Chevelle SS396, the 427 Ford Galaxy, the classic Pontiac 1964 GTO, burgundy body, black vinyl rooftop, 4-speed on the floor, 289 engine under the hood, roared like a lion. And I had a close personal contact with that model of car because Reverend Randall Lanier, the preacher at Sardis Methodist Church, where I regularly attended Sunday services, Reverend Randall Lanier couldn't have been more than 26 years old. Fresh out of theological school, showed up on his first day of preaching with his wife and his 2 sons in, guess what? A Pontiac 1964 GTO. I was a believer from that point on. All my prayers were answered. My preacher drove a GTO, and that was enough for me. Randall Lanier settled in as the preacher at Sardis Church and became somewhat of a mentor to me. And later, when I got my driver's license in 1966, he let me drive that car. I had the same experience driving Randall's GTO as I did driving my friend's Morgan. So the posh cars still played a big role for me. I was never destined to own one of those muscle cars, but I surely was glad to drive it, and praise the Lord continued to be something I would say when I shifted from first to second to third to fourth and rolled out on the Grand American Highway, headed somewhere in Randall's GTO. He didn't let me drive it much, but he let me drive it a little bit. Even though preachers were not supposed to drive GTOs, Randall didn't take away from his preaching. Randall was a bit of an intellectual, and some of the sermons that he preached went a bit over my head, but I did appreciate them. But what I most appreciated about the Methodist service was when Randall would say, "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. Amen." That was when I could walk out of the sanctuary, open the doors, and what did I see? Brevard Road right in front of me, going north and going south. There it was, the road calling me. So as I stood there on the church steps, my tie undone, warm sun in my face, looking at Brevard Road, I romanticized it. Many years later, when I was traveling around performing poetry for school students and teaching students how to write from the imaginative storm point of view, I had an opportunity in a library to take a break. And when I was sitting in the library, taking my break, I jotted down a poem about the road. You may have heard stories of singer-songwriters who will say they were driving somewhere in a cab or in the back of a bus or after a concert, and they had this flash of an inspiration, and they jotted the song down, recorded it the next week, and it became a hit. Well, this little poem that I wrote about the road never really became a hit, but it did happen fast. And I was sitting there in that library, and the next thing I knew, I had written the poem. And it's been with me ever since. So I'd like to share my romanticized view of the road with you. And the poem is titled, you probably have already guessed it, The Road. The road is always calling me. It comes turning out of my childhood, twisting through my morning, interrupting my picnic. It taps when I'm asleep. Like a kitten, wishfully waiting for the door to open, I'm always dreaming of the road. As a child, I stood beside the road, and I watched it as it stretched in the summer afternoon, so concrete, so eternal. As a young man, the road carried me past my school, with its oak wooden floors and wide eastern views, carried me past my church, so small now, inadequate steeple, stained glass windows, carried me past gardens with corn so high, I'm sure it only grew to give the wind a place to go, carried me past my father's blows and mother's easy words, carried me away from home and into the night and into the next morning and the next night and the next morning until I stand before you right here, right now, breathing and alive. The road is always calling me. And the road I'm referring to in that poem, of course, is Brevard Road. It's the same road I hitchhiked on when I was a boy and caused that accident I told you about. And the inadequate steeple I mentioned in the poem is the steeple that still sits on Sardis Church. My grandfather made that steeple. He was a deacon in the church, and he did it for the love of the steeple and for the love of the church. And there is a stained glass window in that church that does have our family name still on it to this day. So when I was standing there on the steps of Sardis Church, looking at Brevard Road, thinking about where the road would take me, I had no idea that decades later, I would be sitting in a quiet room in Manila in the Philippines, recording a show about the memories I have of those years, long ago. So I did indeed leave Western North Carolina in search of whatever the world could offer me. And I have to say, as I said, I'm sitting here in Manila, it's been quite a journey, and it's not over at all. I'm still waking up every morning wondering what will happen next, what's right around the corner. And the best part of that concept, what's right around the corner, that question, is that the corner is always right there. You don't have to travel all over the world to see what's around the corner. The corner is always where the mysteries sit. All you have to do is go out, glance to the right, glance to the left, and see what's there. It's the curiosity in my mind that makes it so interesting. Well, what's going to happen? What will the day bring? What will the day teach you that you didn't know yesterday? What will the day teach me I didn't know yesterday? And expanding beyond those questions, what am I willing to learn today? What am I willing to have someone teach me? Or what am I willing to teach myself today? Same question for you. What are you willing to learn? What are you willing to have somebody else teach you? How active can we be in this? I would submit that we can be very active in this idea of learning new things, of being open, allowing information to come in, allowing our imaginations to guide us through the meanderings that we're naturally going to do, regardless of where we are in the world or what we're up to. And I suspect you might be able to agree with me on this when I'm talking about the road calling me. I'm really talking about a broader concept of life itself calling me. Who am I? Where will I go? Who are you? Where will you go? The road is a symbol. Cars are symbols. Where we go, the choices we make, what we learn, how we put it all together each day and transfer what we've learned, transfer what we know to the next day and start all over again. Indeed, the road has taken me a lot of places around the world, but going around the world to see places really isn't the point. The point is going somewhere and seeing something and being aware of the things around you while you're on the journey. This takes me back to the first time I really got serious about going on the road. It was 1970. The Vietnam War was raging. I'd finished 2 years of college at Brevard Junior College and wasn't really planning to go back. As a result, I'd lost my student deferment, and I was a prime candidate to be drafted and shipped off to Vietnam to fight on the jungle front lines of a war that the Vietnamese to this day call the American War, not the Vietnam War, which we called it when it was raging back in the 70s. Since I was primed to be drafted and didn't quite know what to do or how to go about figuring out how to keep my freedom, I decided to hitchhike from Asheville to Denver because I knew that there was an answer out there somewhere on the road. And I also knew that one of my new good friends, John Van Hasselt, who had been in Mexico, was going to be driving his Volkswagen bus up to Denver. And I thought, why not meet John in Denver? Let's go on the road, catch some rides in cars, and see what happens. Here we are, back to the curiosity. I wrote a poem about it. I'd like to perform it for you now. Here it is, June 1970. Hitching west on I-40 during my 20th summer, when draft boards were sending boys like me to Vietnam. As I stood on the exit ramp, long-haul trucks downshifted for the Canton grade, giving me hope I'd catch a ride all the way to California, far past a few exits down where I could have been working graveyard shift at Champion Paper. To this day, locals still claim the stench that rises from the stacks late at night and settles on the meadow in the morning smells like money. I had 100 in my jeans and a thumb pointed west, hungry for strangers. Although the thumb, like Route 66 and old T-birds, is a powerful symbol in the American psyche, it's the eye that catches the ride. Wayne, a military intelligence officer who drove a Pontiac Le Mans with a loaded .38 in the glove box, wanted me to join military intelligence and spy on college students. Wayne dropped me off in St. Louis, where I crossed the Mississippi, muddy with barges. Later, the Missouri hardwoods vanished into Kansas wheat on that gradual incline to the Rockies. The next morning in Denver, I had bacon and eggs at the Waffle House before I walked into an Army-Navy store and noticed a footlocker in the back packed with bayonets. I reached in, grabbed one of the bayonets by its hilt, balanced it in my hand. The air in front of me suddenly filled up with soldiers. I plunged my blade into the air. Some soldiers screamed, some of the soldiers crumpled to the ground, others exploded like mist in the morning air. Then the room went quiet again. The soldiers all disappeared. All that was left was the smell of the moldy scent coming off the old army gear that sat all around me in the store. I put the bayonet back in its box, walked to the front past the cashier, who was making change for an old American flag. When I stepped back out onto the street, I knew right then and there I would never go to Vietnam. Later that day, my buddy John Van Hassel showed up from Mexico. We spent maybe 2 or 3 days in the Boulder, Denver area, but I was restless. I knew I had to do something, and what I had decided to do was to hitchhike back to North Carolina and apply for a status as a conscientious objector. For those of you who don't know what a conscientious objector is, it's a person who consciously is opposed to fighting in a war, and they make an appeal to the draft board or to the governmental authorities, whomever they might be at the time, and hope to be awarded the status of CO, or conscientious objector, which meant back then that I would have to serve 2 years alternate service in lieu of going into the Army and going to fight in Vietnam. Now, as I sit here recording this show all these years later, I'm not so sure if I'm completely 100% opposed to violence and war. I have concluded that when you deal in violence and in war, it really doesn't get you anywhere in the long run. I, at the time, knew that the war that was raging in Vietnam was not a just war. It was a war that later history proved me to be right and many others to be right. It was just a war that was flat out wrong and should never have been fought. And I knew somewhere in my little brain, my 20-year-old psychology, that I wanted to save myself for something more important. And maybe what's more important is just talking to the next person right in front of me, or making this podcast, broadcasting this show. But I knew then that I had no intention of going to Vietnam, and if that meant I had to escape to Canada and live there, I had decided that I would do that. I didn't think of it as cowardly. I thought of it as discerning and prudent given the political climate of the day. So I returned to North Carolina. I applied for my conscientious objector status, based it on my religious sensibilities that I had learned at Sardis Church back when Randall Lanier was preaching, and all the other preachers that came before Randall Lanier. In the Methodist system, the preachers switched churches every 4 years. That's why I had exposure to many of the ministers. I wouldn't say I was that much of a Christian, but that was my background. And so that was the approach that I took when I applied for my conscientious objector status. I did that in July and was waiting around for the answer in August when another buddy of mine, whom I'd known for a while, gave me a buzz and said, let's hitchhike to British Columbia. So once again, I went back out to I-40 in August of the same year, 1970, and off we went to San Francisco, hitchhiking across America, up the coast to British Columbia. And then I hitchhiked with my friend across British Columbia. It was a rather hard slog because nobody would pick us up, but I was thinking I could just stay here and I wouldn't have to worry about the draft. So somewhere along the way in that trip, my mother called, or I called my mother by payphone, of course, and was given the news that I had been granted the status of conscientious objector and that I was supposed to find alternative service and go serve for 2 years doing something that would help humanity. Turned out I did my 2 years alternate service at Wesley Nursing Center in Charlotte. I was an orderly, basically changing beds, washing patients, helping people feel better. And I watched a lot of soap operas, General Hospital, As the World Turns. The patients loved the soap operas, and I did too. The stories. I was after the stories even then, the experiences. I didn't have a car most of the time when I was in Charlotte. I rode a bicycle, so that was my conveyance. So it's not about the car necessarily. It's about how you get around, how you move. Again, it's about the freedom. So I did my alternate service, and after that, I let myself fall into my 20s. There was a lot of hitchhiking, a lot of roaming around, a lot of traveling, a lot of doing this and that. I probably hitchhiked across America 4 or 5 times in that decade. And hitchhiking was only part of it. I did own cars. I owned an old van. I had a Plymouth station wagon. I had a little Mercury coupe that was a bit of a sports car. I don't remember how I got that car, but I did enjoy driving that car around. God knows how many different cars I had over the years. They were all old. They were all somewhat cheap, easy to purchase, easy to work on, and they got me where I wanted to go. When you think about cars, when you think about travel, what comes to your mind? Is it something you long to do? Is it something you must do? When you are on the road, do you feel at home? When you're in your familiar car, do you feel at home? See the USA in your Chevrolet, Dinosaur said. So there's a lot more to it than just seeing the USA. It's really about finding oneself, don't you think? And there's a lot more of the world to see than the USA. I remember once I did a terrific road trip. I didn't drive, but it was a road trip. It was in a Chevrolet, of all cars. It was one of those suburban Chevrolets. I had been touring West Africa in the international school systems in West Africa, making appearances. This was in the mid-90s. And I'd been to Nigeria and Ghana, Accra, and I was over in Senegal, in Dakar, and was scheduled to go north to Nouakchott, Mauritania, where I was scheduled to spend a week teaching the school students in the American Embassy how to perform poetry and how to write poetry. As usual, I was drawing from the old classic poems that the students had in their textbook, and I was working with the imaginative storm writing methodology that I had developed back then, and I'm still doing to this day. From the imaginative storm to the creative form, from storms come forms. The students understood that. I was in Senegal. We had been at a teachers' conference, and we were scheduled, as I said, to go north to Nouakchott, Mauritania. We were supposed to fly. Somehow, all of the flights got canceled. I was with a group of people who also worked in the American Embassy and taught in the American Embassy. One was Kathleen Stafford. Kathleen was the leader of the group, and because we couldn't catch a flight from Dakar to Nouakchott, Kathleen called the embassy and asked the embassy to send a driver in a Chevy Suburban to drive us from Dakar to Nouakchott overland. So it was a terrific journey. We stopped at the border, which was a river. We had cokes, hung out, waited for the ferry. The driver insisted that we stop by his area, his town, and he wanted to introduce all of us to his wife. So we stopped by the driver's house, had a little bit of food. He introduced us to his wife, and then we went on our way. I remember we just rolled on and on and on. And as we were traveling, of course, we talked. That was when Kathleen told us the story of how she and her husband were two of the 6 U.S. Embassy staff members who were not captured during the Iranian hostage crisis, 1979 to 1981. Because they were able to evade capture, they ultimately escaped Iran with the help of Canadian diplomats and the CIA. The episode became known as the Canadian Caper. So Kathleen told us the whole story as we were driving overland up the coast of Africa to Nouakchott, Mauritania, so I could teach poetry and performance to the school kids. So we made our way to the American Embassy, where I spent a week working with the school kids. And I did have a chance to play basketball with a platoon of American Marines who were guarding the embassy. As you can imagine, I was no match for the Marines. I tossed the ball a few times, but mostly I watched the guys run back and forth up and down the court. Other than that, it was an easy week in Mauritania. The students were fantastic. I enjoyed working there. I have a few vague memories about walking around town. The streets weren't paved. They were sandy dirt, really. So it was a time before the time we have now, long, long ago, once upon a time, far, far away in a dreamy mist. It was a good trip, and I spent about 5 weeks traveling around West Africa, mostly in cars driven by other people. In fact, I don't believe I drove even once while I was there. Which brings me around to right now here in Manila. I've been driving a fair amount in Manila. It's a very different scene here than it is in America, where I've driven millions and millions of miles. My Toyota Corolla is parked, waiting for me to come back March 1st, and I'll drive it around Western North Carolina, and in April, I'll probably drive it back out I-40 past the Canton exit, past the truck still downshifting for the Canton grade, through Pigeon River, over I-40, Nashville, Memphis, Little Rock, Oklahoma City, Amarillo, Tucumcari, where I'll turn northwest and head up to the high country and Taos, springtime in April. For now, it's December and it's warm, and I'm here in Manila, and I have been driving quite a bit. I mentioned the murmuration of the blackbirds. If you've ever seen blackbirds swirling around in the fall sky, funneling down into the trees, you know what a murmuration is, and nobody quite knows exactly how those blackbirds know what to do and when to do it, but they certainly do seem to manage to fly in a flock, and as they do, they're making art. Now, I can't say that driving in Manila is making art like the blackbirds make the art above the trees, but I can say that when I've been driving in Manila, the traffic rules have a very different configuration than they do in the States. In the States, you're supposed to come to the stop sign, you wait, look both ways, and pull out if no car is coming. If a car is coming, you wait until the car passes, and then you pull out. Here in Manila, you come to the stop sign, you look both ways, and you pull out into the traffic, and somehow people give way. It's a really interesting dance. When I first saw it, I was terrified. I didn't want to pull out in traffic because I thought I was going to be smashed by the car coming my way. But what I realized was, if you edge out slowly and you stay in the rhythm of the movement, somehow the cars do a fluid dance. They give way and you move into the flow. The other variable here in Manila that does not exist in the States, the mopeds, the motor scooters, the motorcycles. I've read that there are 80,000 certified motor scooters with business licenses hauling things around all over Manila 24 hours a day. So during rush hour, it's possible to sit at an intersection and have 100, 200, maybe even 300 motor scooters surrounding you. When I first started to negotiate the motor scooters here in Manila, I thought I had to watch out for every single one. But as it turned out, I didn't have to watch out for every single one. I don't ever have to watch out for them. I have to be aware of them, but not try to miss them. They are missing me. They can move within inches of a car and not hit it. Now, I'm not saying that the scooters don't fall under the wheels of the cars. I am saying that I've driven a fair amount and I've ridden around here a fair amount, and I have very seldom seen scooter accidents. So I know it happens. I know cars get dinged. There are millions and millions of cars here. This is a metro area of 13 million, some say, maybe more, growing like crazy. One of the 10 most populated cities in the world. So you can imagine the swirl and the curl and the buzz and the dings and the bangs and the honks and all of the swirliness that would go on in traffic. And I will say, people around here don't measure their time in traffic by kilometers or miles. So in other words, a 3-mile journey on a Friday afternoon during rush hour might take an hour and 15 minutes. So you learn how to have a relationship with a traffic jam. You learn how to watch the people go by. It's a different kind of being in a car. And there are millions of conveyances here, motor scooters, little motorcycles, tricycles, people pulling things, large trucks rumbling along, very wealthy cars like Bentley. Now and then you'll see a white Bentley in the middle of all of this. Old rusty cars that will barely run, jeepneys that look like Jeeps, fabricated from some sort of World War II model, painted all colorful, and people ride around in the jeepneys like they were city buses, because they are in a way city buses. And then there are the buses. So there's just a lot of traffic and a lot of movement, which I find to be appropriate. The road is always calling me, as I said. So why not the movement? So when I'm in the traffic here, I don't mind it so much. I suppose I should be a little bit more skittish, perhaps even afraid, but I'm not. I'm thinking of all the times I've covered all the roads, been in all the cars, repaired the cars, fixed the cars. Now I just drive to the Jiffy Lube and say, change my oil, please. And I keep my old Toyota Corolla up to date. But the cars, they're really important. The conveyance. Where are you going? Where do you want to go? Do your feet carry you? Does the car carry you? Here in Manila, some people have drivers. That's kind of nice, I must admit. I'm a driver. I know how it feels when I can get a ride with somebody else driving. So where are we going? What are we doing? What are we making? We are entering the last of 2025. You are listening to this show in December 2025. If you're listening to it being aired on WPVM-FM or on KCEI. If you are listening to it later, just know that we are sitting at the end of the first 25 years of this century. We have witnessed the human race unfolding in ways that I never imagined. So when I look back over the years, back in 1970 when I was hitchhiking, look back to when I was a boy driving my little go-kart around, when Randall O'Neill rolled up in his 1964 GTO, when I think about the 55 Chevy and the 57 Chevy, and all of those cars and boats and trains and things that have taken me where I wanted to go or thought I needed to go or would have liked to have gone if I could have, or I did go because I could go. All of those things have stretched out over the last 75 years. We are now in an age of the electric car. We are now in an age of political disruption. We are now in an age that asks all of us to engage in some way that is meaningful, in some human way that will allow us to become more connected to the world. All of these cars, all of this conveyance for me has just been a way of connecting with somebody. I want to go see a dear friend. I want to knock at the door, say hello, sit down, have a coffee, have a conversation. Some of the people I've known over my lifetime, they've gone away. We've drifted apart. Some of the people I remember fondly, others I've forgotten and I don't remember their names at all. But no matter what kind of relationship I've had with any of these people, no matter who they are, where they come from, what they do, if they're still in my life, still out there somewhere, not in my life, I'm grateful for everybody that's happened in my life. And I'm grateful that you're listening to this show. And I'm grateful that maybe you and I have met somewhere along the way. John, if you're listening, I'm talking about Manila at Elevation Cafe in Taos. John often asks me, how's Manila? He'd been there one time. He says he'd like to go back again, but I don't think he ever will. So John, if you're listening, how you doing? I hope you have a coffee for me at Elevation Cafe in Taos. And for my friends in Asheville, there are plenty of cafes we can rendezvous in March. So on that note, I would really like to say thank you for listening to my meanderings, listening to my car stories, taking the ride in the Morgan, listening to some of the things I had to say. I wish you were here. I wish I could hear what you have to say about your car stories, about how you've gotten around in the world, about what you mean to do tomorrow, about what you would like to learn, about what kind of car you drive, or maybe you don't drive at all. Maybe you walk. I love to walk as well. Conveyance, freedom, automobiles, cars, friends, home, and all of the rest. So on that note, thanks for listening to this provocative conversation from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Nave. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Davine Dyer, for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier and Mike Tilley for doing the same, KCEI Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. If you'd like to connect with me, Navé at jamesnave.com. I would love to hear from you. You can also connect with me every Saturday on Zoom when I host the Imaginative Storm Writing Prompt of the Week, gathering with my creative collaborator, Allegra Houston. It's a great group of writers. We get together, we tell stories, we unpack some questions, we generate a bit of writing, we read it out loud, and then we go away and come back again the next week and do it again, over and over, like traveling. Yet another conveyance, telling stories, writing them down, sending something out in the world that is meaningful. If you'd like to know more about that, or if you'd like to tell me a story that you know that you would like for me to hear, Navé at jamesnave.com. That's how you can reach me. I'd love to hear from you. So with that, once again, thanks for spending this time with me. I do hope you come back sometime very soon. And until then, maybe, just maybe, you and I will catch each other on that turnaround somewhere down the line.